Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brittany of BrittanyJJones.com. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the channel. I hope that you will like what you see and subscribe below for more. In today's video, we are going to be sewing along to view A on the new McCall's spring patterns. The numbers are M8384 and M8385. They are the same styles on these pattern envelopes, but this one is in a different envelope because it is the extended sizes. So this one goes up from a 20W through a 38W. It's in two envelopes though, so make sure that you're looking at the envelope and the sizes to make sure that you're getting the right size that you will need. For sizing, I cut the size 18 around the bust and the waist, and I graded over to the 20 for the hips. As far as fabric goes, I used a rayon. This is the dress right here. I used a rayon for my dress. Let's go ahead and get started sewing. Again, we're going to be sewing along with view A on McCall's 8384 and 8385. They are the same styles, they're just in different size envelopes. 8385 is the extended size pattern, so this one here goes up to size 38W. So just make sure that you're looking at the finished garment measurements on the back of the envelope. That will help you determine which size pattern that you need to purchase. It also gives you suggested fabrics on the back, so this dress can be made out of cotton blends, gauze, gingham, lightweight seersucker. I actually use a rayon for the dress that I'm going to be using in this sew along. Go ahead and cut out all the pattern pieces that you will need for view A, and let's get started sewing. To get started, we're going to start working on pattern piece number 1. That is our front. So this is one of my fronts here. Before we start getting into the gathers, I do want to show you all that I have placed interfacing here. On our pattern, you will see a fold line for interfacing, fold line for facing, and a center front marking. So if you didn't see those, take another look at your pattern piece. Where it says the fold line for interfacing, I actually applied a strip of interfacing right there in that sort of rectangle where it says for the interfacing. That's just going to give me a little bit more stability, especially since we're going to be folding this a couple times, and we're also going to be adding buttons and buttonholes. This is just what I did. It's not notated in the pattern that you should do it, but I just like to do it. Again, I always want to stabilize those high stress areas, so I just wanted to mention that. The first thing that we want to do is gather along the upper edge front here between our armhole seam line and our large dot. So again, from the dot to your seam line, you want to do 2 rows of gathering stitches. If you don't know what gathering stitches are, you just need to lengthen out your stitch length. It's normally at about a 2.5, but all of our machines go up to different numbers. Mine goes up to a 5, but I know some go up to a 10. So definitely check your sewing machine manual if you don't know how to lengthen out your stitch length. And then you also want to do a row of stay stitching. For the stay stitching, we are stay stitching along this side edge here to this last notch. For this pattern, stay stitching is done at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I kind of did mine at 1/4 of an inch. 1/8 is really tiny, so mine is about at 1/4 of an inch, just so you know. So again, go ahead and do your stay stitching, go ahead and do your gathers for both of your front pieces. Okay, now that we have done the gathering and the stay stitching, now we're going to fold along our interfacing fold line. So go ahead and fold in along your fold line for interfacing, and let's go ahead and give that a press. Okay, once you have pressed in along the fold line for interfacing, now we are going to baste close to this inner fold here, this inner edge. We're just going to baste this down all the way from the top to the bottom, and then we're going to baste across the top, and we will baste across the bottom. So let's go to the sewing machine now and do some basting stitches. All right, now that we have folded in and pressed along the interfacing fold line, now we're going to fold in once again along the facing fold line. So again, if you did not transfer those markings, maybe you put some snips, whatever works best for you, let's just go ahead and fold in right along that facing fold line now. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to press it, and then we're going to baste it close to this inner edge. However, this time, once we get down to the bottom, we're going to stop about 5 inches before we get to the hem. We need to keep this open so that way we'll be able to flip it out and finish the hem when we get toward the end of the dress. So again, go ahead and fold in along the facing fold line now, and then we will baste close to the inner edge again, but make sure that you stop about 5 inches before you get all the way down to the bottom of the dress. Okay, now that we have our second row of basting done, first we folded in for the interfacing fold line, then we folded in along the facing fold line. So this is what it's looking like now. And again, you should have left an opening down here toward the hem about 5 inches before you got down to the bottom. Now we can go ahead and put the fronts to the side. Make sure that you're doing the same thing to your other front. Now we can put the front to the side and start to work on the back. The next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and grab our back pattern piece. This is pattern piece number 3, and we're going to do the same exact thing that we did to the front. So along your side here, we're going to do some stay stitching, and remember, stay stitching is done at 1/8 of an inch. It's normally done at 1/2 inch, but for this particular pattern, it's done at 1/8 of an inch. And then we're also going to do 2 rows of gathering stitches along the neckline edge, the top of the pattern. So again, go ahead and do your stay stitching from here along the side, going down to just right above the waistline seam. Go ahead and do some stay stitching here. And then along the top, the upper edge here of the back, go ahead and do 2 rows of gathering stitches. Once you have that done, then we can move on to the next step. To begin working on our side front, we're going to take pattern piece 2 and 4. This is our side front and side back. You should have cut out 2 of both. I'm going to place these right sides facing here along the side seams. You should have transferred a notch. You want to go ahead and match that up and pin in place, making sure that you have a right sides facing. Okay, now that we have it pinned, we can go ahead and stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now that you have your side, front, and back sewn together, this is what mine look like along the inside. As you can see, I did go ahead and finish off the edges with my serger, and I have pressed the seam flat. Now we can go ahead and start to work on our side ruffle, which is pattern piece number 5. So let's go ahead and grab that now. Okay, here's my pattern piece number 5 here. And for this, much like the other pieces in this dress, we need to do 2 rows of gathering stitches along the upper edge, and you should have transferred some small dots, so you want to make sure that you start and stop between those small dots. So go ahead and again do your 2 rows of gathering stitches. I've already done mine. After you have those done, then we can go ahead and pin our side, front, and back to the ruffle portion. First thing that I'm going to do is lay this with right sides facing. And your center seam here of the side, front, and back, that's going to match up to the circle here that's on the middle of your ruffle. I'm going to pin that there. I'm also going to pin this end here along the end of the side, front, and back. And then on this side, I'm going to grab my bobbin stitches, and I'm just going to begin pulling up on the threads like so. Okay, I have it all pinned together here, so this is what mine is looking like. I'm going to go to the sewing machine. I'm just going to stitch this at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to finish off the seam with my serger. So let's go ahead and stitch this in place now. All right, so I'm back from the sewing machine. I have mine all sewn and I have it serged and pressed. So again, here's my stitch right here. I finished it off with my serger. You can remove your basting stitches if you want. I didn't remove mine. I just went ahead and serged over them. And then you want to press your seam so that it's going up to the bodice, the side, front, and back, not down to the skirt portion. So once you're done, it should look like this. And now we are ready to attach this to the front and to the back. So let's go ahead and grab our front and back pieces now. All right, so first I'm going to go ahead and attach it to the front here. So with right sides facing, grab my pins. I'm going to match up the notches and just start to pin in place. Okay, so if you have gapping in yours like this, you can see where we stay stitched at, and you can see where we are pinning it at to the side front. You can take some snippers. I just have my scissors here, my shears, and you can put little clips right up to that stay stitching mark. And this is just going to allow the fabric to just spread just a little bit so that we can pin this. So it's going to just open up ever so slightly. Not a lot, but just enough so that we'll be able to pin. Okay, I have it all pinned here. So this side is my front, this side is my back. I'm going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, now that we have our side front here sewn to our front and back, now we can go ahead and put this to the side. As you can see, I did press my seams going toward the front and to the back. I also finished it off with my serger. This is what it looks like here along the right side. I'm loving the way this is coming together. I think this is going to be really nice. So now we can go ahead and put this to the side and start to work on the sleeves. Okay, so here is my sleeve here. You should have cut out 2 sleeves. And so the first thing that we're going to do, you probably already guessed it, much like the rest of the dress so far, we're going to do some gathering stitches. So go ahead and lengthen out your stitch length back to the longest stitch on your machine. We're going to do some gathering stitches up here along the top between the seam lines. Again, make sure you stop at your 5/8 of an inch seam line, 2 rows of gathering stitches here. And you also want to do them along the bottom between the small circles that you should have transferred. So go ahead and do your gathering stitches. After you have those done, put your machine back on your regular machine stitch, and we're going to fold our sleeve right sides facing and go ahead and stitch down the sleeve seam. Once it's pinned, we're going to stitch the underarm seam here using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, make sure that you switch back to your regular machine stitch so that you're not stitching this using a gathering stitch. Let's go ahead and do that now. Then I'm going to finish it off with my serger. All right, now that we have the underarm seam sewn, you can see I finished off the edge. I pressed my seam going toward the back. And so this is what it looks like here. Now let's go ahead and grab the sleeve lining. Okay, this is my sleeve lining here, our sleeve stay. This is pattern piece number 7. I just so happen to have had this purple fabric in my fabric stash, and it is a perfect match for this main fabric. So the fabric weight of this is very similar in weight. If you want your sleeves to be more full, then you can use a lining that has a little bit more body if you choose to, but mine's is very similar to the main fabric. You should have transferred some darts at the bottom of your pattern. So I've already sewn 2 of the darts here, so I'm going to sew this one here with you all. So what we're going to do, this is the wrong side of my fabric facing up. You should be able to see your dart legs. We want to bring those dart legs together and we're going to pin them. So I'm going to pin through one dart leg here, and I'm going to make sure I'm coming through the other dart leg, and I'm going to pin that in place. And I'm going to continue doing that all the way to the point of the dart. Okay, I have my dart pinned in place. We're going to begin stitching down here at the fullest part of the dart. We're going to back stitch here, and then we're going to stitch all the way to the point here, the end. And we're not going to back stitch here. We're just going to leave some thread tails like I've done here. And we're going to tie those thread tails off into a knot. You want to tie these off into a knot. We don't want to back stitch because that can create a bubble right here at the tip of the dart. So again, you can back stitch here, stitch along the dart leg, and then just leave long thread tails and just tie a knot at the end of the dart. You're going to do that for all of your darts. You should have 6 total, 3 on each of your sleeve linings. So let's go ahead and stitch those in place now. After you have your darts sewn, you want to press them going toward the front. And you know you're pressing it toward the front by looking at your notches. The single notch is for the front and the double notch is for the back. So again, after you have them sewn, press them all going toward the front. I'm going to go ahead and press this one here. After I have it pressed, then I'm going to lay the underarm seam here of the sleeve lining together, and I'm going to stitch this at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So let's go ahead and press and then fold this right sides facing and stitch this in place at a 5/8 of an inch. All right, after you have your darts pressed in place and you have stitched your underarm seam here of your sleeve stay and you finished off the raw edges, now we can go ahead and put these right sides facing. So I'm going to flip this sleeve here, slide this into the sleeve stay. I'm going to match up the underarm seams, pin that in place first. And now we need to pull on the gathers here along the edge of the sleeve so that it matches with our sleeve stay. Okay, now that we have this pinned in place, now we can go ahead and stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, after we have it sewn, I went ahead and did a serger on it. That's not really necessary since this is going to be all flipped to the inside. You could just trim it down if you want to do that. But after you have it sewn, you can go ahead and flip it out like so. Take a look at everything. You can pull out any gathering stitches that you see. And now we want to go ahead and do some understitching. So for understitching, you want to make sure that you have your seam facing toward your lining or your sleeve stay. Make sure that's facing toward that. And we're going to do understitching right here close to the seam, about an 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, if you will. No more than a 1/4 of an inch. So just go ahead and do a row of understitching all the way around, making sure that you have your seam allowance facing toward the sleeve stay. You don't want to have it down facing toward the fabric, have it up facing toward the sleeve stay, and just go ahead and do a row of understitching. That's going to help the sleeve stay to stay toward the inside of the sleeve, and that's what we want. We don't want that to be rolling out, and the understitching goes a long way to helping that. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, after you have done your understitching, yours should look similar to mine. So this is what mine looks like here. Okay, now we're going to put this inside of the sleeve now. And now we need to pull up the gathers along the upper edge of the sleeve so that it matches with this. And then we can baste that in place as well. So I'm going to go ahead and grab these bobbin stitches here and just pull to gather up the fabric. Again, this is the upper edge of the sleeve here where we put 2 rows of gathering stitches. And we're going to match this up. You should have transferred a circle in the middle of the sleeve. Make sure that you match those up and pin in place. Once you have this pin, you want to baste across the top and match up these edges here as well. Match up your notches and you can baste this in place too. Let's go ahead and do all the basting stitches now. All right, now that we have our sleeve all basted together, this is what it looks like. So now let's go ahead and pin this into our dress. So with right sides facing, I'm going to go ahead and grab my pins. I'm going to match up the underarm seams here with the seam here on our side, front and back. I'm going to pin that in place. And now I'm just going to match up the notches. So you should have your double notches that match up, your single notches that match up, and just start to pin everything in place. All right, once you have it pinned, we can go ahead and stitch this at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then you want to finish off your seams, your edges with a serger, or however you've been finishing off your edges for your garment. Go ahead and finish them off after you have it sewn. All right, I have my sleeves sewn and I have finished them off with my serger. Both of them are now installed. So now we can go ahead and put this to the side and we can start to work on our collar. To begin working on our collar, which is pattern piece number 9, you should have interfaced 1. So we were supposed to cut 2 on the fold of fabric and 1 on the fold of interfacing. So what we're going to do is right sides facing. We are going to lay the collar pieces like so. And we are going to stitch them together, leaving the notched edge open. So we have the notches up here. We're going to leave this side open. So we're going to be stitching along the sides as well as the lower edge of the collar. So go ahead and grab your pins and we can pin that in place. Okay, now we can go ahead and stitch the collar at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, make sure that you leave the notched edge open. Now that you have the collar sewn, now you want to go ahead and trim. So grab your shears and just trim. Okay, now we can go ahead and turn the collar. I'm going to poke out your corners. Okay, once you have the corners poked out, now you want to go ahead and give this a really good press, and then you can baste the raw edges together. Okay, here is my collar here after I have turned it. So now let's go ahead and grab the collar band, which is pattern piece number 8. With pattern piece number 8, you should have cut out 2 of fabric and 1 out of interfacing. So the one that is not interfaced, you want to fold up your 5/8 of an inch on the single notched edge, not the double notched edge. Fold up 5/8 of an inch, press that, and then trim it down to 3/8 of an inch. So as you can see here, this one is my uninterfaced side. This one's interfaced. I have just pressed up 5/8 of an inch on the single notched edge, and then I trim that down to 3/8 of an inch. And so now we're going to grab our collar. We're going to pin the interfaced side of the collar to the interfaced side of the collar band. Go ahead and lay that like so. And then we're going to take the uninterfaced collar band and lay that on top like so. Once you have them laid, then we can go ahead and start pinning in place. Now that we have it pinned, we can go to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure that you have your markings transferred and begin stitching at your circles and just stitch all the way around and then end at your other circle here. All right, once we have it sewn, we can go ahead and trim. Okay, now we can just turn the collar band down and go and give this a press. All right, I have given my collar a really good press, so this is what it's looking like here. Also, once you get to these curves on the ends, you want to make sure that you notch out the bulkiness. So here's a look at mine. I just kind of did some notches here to notch out that bulk. So then when you flip and turn it, it lays nice and flat. So make sure that you do that so you don't have a lot of bulk right there around the curve. Now let's go ahead and grab our dress and we can pin it in place. Let's go ahead and start pinning in place. You want to adjust the gathers to fit. So I'm going to find my gathers here and start to gather the fabric up around the back of the dress. And the circles that we transferred that were up here along the sleeve, they should be matching up to dots that you transferred on your collar. So you want to make sure that you match those up and pin them in place. You should have a notch. Go ahead and match that up. All right, now that we have the collar pinned to the neckline edge, now we can go ahead and go and stitch this at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You want to make sure when you're stitching that you keep this pressed edge here out of the way. So make sure that you don't catch that in your stitch. And again, just back stitch at the beginning and go all the way to the end, making sure that you do not catch this edge in your stitch. Let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, I have my collar sewn. You want to take a quick look just to make sure you like the way everything looks, that you don't have any like folds or something that doesn't quite look like a gather. You want to try to just take a look at that in case you want to go over it. But if you like the way everything looks, now you can go ahead and trim down this seam. Definitely be careful and take your time. You don't want to accidentally cut your dress or your collar band. So let's go ahead and trim. Okay, now we can go ahead and press our seam going up toward the band. Once you have it pressed up toward the band, then you want to take this folded pressed edge and we're just going to fold it over like so. And you can grab a needle and thread and do some slip stitching, or you can grab some pins and pin it so that you can do a stitch in the ditch. All right, I have my neckband slip stitch closed, so this is what it looks like along the inside here of the dress. Again, you could choose to do slip stitching or you can do a stitch in the ditch. Now that we have this done, we can start to work on the hem. So down here where we stopped our basting stitch 5 inches from the edge. We're going to flip that out onto itself along the fold line for facing. And we're going to stitch across here at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to do the same thing for the other side as well. You just want to flip that out onto itself right along that fold line for facing. And now we're just going to stitch right across here at a 5/8 of an inch. So let's go ahead and do that now, and then we can trim. Okay, now that we have it sewn down here along the edge, we can go ahead and trim. So for the facing portion, you want to trim all of that off. But for the dress portion, you want to come in maybe about 5/8 of an inch and then trim that off, as well as trim the corner. So this is what it will look like after you have it trimmed. So you just want to come in a little bit on the dress, not all the way over here on the dress, but trim away all of the corner. Then we want to do a 1/4 of an inch basting stitch along the lower edge. This is going to help us ease in the fabric if we need to around the curves. For me, I'm just going to continue with this 5/8 of an inch stitch, and I'm going to go all the way around the hem. That way when I press up the hem, I know I'm pressing directly on my 5/8 of an inch seam line. But I do recommend doing that 1/4 of an inch basting stitch as well, because when we come to parts that are full and have a lot of fabric, you can pull on that basting stitch to kind of ease in the fullness around the curves. So let's go ahead and do our stitching. Again, you can do the 1/4 of an inch basting stitch. And then for me, I'm also going to follow along with this 5/8 of an inch stitch, just so when I press, I know I'm pressing right on my seam line. Once you have your hem pressed, we can go ahead and stitch it in place. After you have your hem sewn in place, so here's a look at mine here. I just need to go back and cut off loose threads. After you have your hem sewn, then you can go ahead and stitch over your basting stitch that you did along the front here. I just stitched right along mine, and then you want to finish up where we left the opening 5 inches from at the end. Go ahead and do your permanent stitch on top of your basting stitch. Once you have those stitches done, the last thing for you to do to your dress is to add your buttons and buttonholes. Because we all have different sewing machines, I do recommend that you go ahead and pull out your machine manual. That way you can see how to install them. But using your pattern piece guide for the buttonholes, which is pattern piece number 10, you would put this here up at the top, and you would just transfer your buttonhole markings and go ahead and apply your buttonholes and then sew on your buttons. After you have those attached, you are all done with your dress. And again, we sewed along to McCall's 8384 as well as McCall's 8385. Well, that is all for the video, and I really do hope that you all enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down for me below. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next video. Blessings, everyone. Bye.